decided why I was here. But it's Tuesday, September the 8th. It's actually cool-ish, and it's actually quite a nice day. And so if you're not on here watching me, I don't blame you because I'm sure you've got other things to do. But for those of you who have joined me today, well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. So what's going on? Well, let's see. This Sunday, which will be the 13th, I think, will be the first Sunday that we have our 8 o'clock service back. And this will be for those who normally attend the 8 o'clock service. So don't think, aha, I can sneak in, because there are limited places. And if the full company of 8 o'clockers turn up, then that would basically mean we've got quite a few people in the building anyway. So again, on Sunday the 13th, this upcoming Sunday, those who are 8 o'clockers are invited to attend. Good morning, Laurie. It's good to see you. So what do you need to know? Well, there is hand sanitizing machines on the way in. You'll pick up a booklet on the way in. It will not be handed to you. And masks must be worn at all times. Social distancing must be observed at all times. And the service will go on as pretty much normal, with it being a said Rite One service, a Eucharist, of course. You will receive only the bread. The wine is not being offered. And I will come to you. I'll explain this again before the service itself, but I will come around and I will distribute communion that way. So you really don't need to move, apart from if you're at the one end of a pew, and you can come to the other end safely. Good morning, Karen, and good morning, Mark. And at the end of the service, I'll probably come around. I think this will be the easiest way of doing it, with a box of wipes, and you're invited to take one, and then to just wipe down the surfaces, like the front of the pew, the back of the pew, and the ends of the pews, just things that you normally touch without thinking about it. And then you will leave and go to your car with no congregating, and that will be go, and that can get ready for the next one. Good morning, Mike and Jennifer. Good morning, Holly, and good morning, Paula, and good morning, Kit. So let me just run through that again. The 8 o'clock service is for those who are the 8 o'clockers. You know who you are. Hand sanitizer on the way in, masks worn at all times, observe social distancing at all times, wipe down the surfaces at the end. I will come to you to distribute communion in one kind only. Leave the church in an orderly fashion and go to your car. No congregating. People who should not attend, anyone who doesn't want to wear a mask. If you feel that you're the kind of guy or person who just doesn't want to wear a mask, you don't have to, but don't turn up. Anyone with pre-existing conditions, or who lives with someone with a pre-existing condition, we cannot absolutely 100% guarantee that you won't catch COVID-19 if somebody inadvertently has it. It is that secret thing that people can have it and have no symptoms. So if you have a pre-existing condition, which would make it more likely that you would suffer badly, or you live with somebody who has a pre-existing condition, please do not turn up. Anyone who's either had COVID-19 or has been in contact with someone who's been tested positive, or has COVID-19, not had, within the past 14 days, you should stay away as well. Once you've been through that 14 days, then unless you've still got a cough or some symptoms of it, then you should stay away. But after that, you can come. Now, regarding the 10 a.m. service, we will be increasing numbers, but please listen carefully. Do not just turn up. We will call you. And also, it will not be on the 13th. I want to see how things go with the 8 o'clock before I start inviting people to attend. And again, all those things will apply. Hand sanitizer on the way in, masks worn at all times, observe social distancing at all times, etc. The only thing you won't have to do is wipe down the surfaces. So there is an advantage. Why 10 o'clock rather than 10:30? Well, because that's the new norm we find ourselves in with the doing the live streaming is what people are used to, and we get a lot more people watching that than we would do on a normal Sunday 10:30 service. So I'm not changing that. The other thing is just the logistics of it, because I will still want to do the drive-through. Let me have a drink. This caffeine should kick in at some time. The drive-through communion. So if I do it a lot later, that means people would have to turn up a lot later, and it just makes the whole thing drag out too much. So 8 o'clock for right one, 10 o'clock for right two, 11ish for the drive-through, and we'll play it by ear, as with all things. And the fine print is that all things are subject to change. So please look on Facebook for any postings, check your email for anything coming from Jay and or Margot from the parish, and please check your voicemail, because somebody might have phoned you to have left a message as well. Let me just have a drink. And good morning, Pam. So it's kind of exciting times, because I'm looking forward to some sense of normality, and having to get up at 5 in the morning will reintroduce some sense of normality for me. 5 in the morning, that's just Sunday. I don't do that any other day of the week, unless the dog tells me to. I mean, this is what the dog bought for me, because he is the boss. He's not just bossy, he is the boss. So let's look at the COVID numbers for this week, and it's still, yeah. In the US, 6,262,216 positive cases, according to the CDC this morning. So it will be yesterday's number. Some people feel like the COVID-19 response is worth celebrating, and that we're at the top. Well, yeah, we're at the top of the number of deaths and the number of cases per capita. Not things you want to celebrate. Regarding number of deaths, 188,513. To be honest, when people who do this for a living were saying that, we could easily top 200,000 within a couple of months, from a month ago, I just didn't think it would happen. 200,000, a fifth of a million people, which makes it sound a lot worse. It just, surely something would happen to slow this down. Well, no. And so here we are with this incredibly awful number. Florida, the number of positive cases, according to the official website, and I've kind of given up trying to justify where to find information from, because there's just no transparency anywhere, and so you're dealing with shadow numbers, really, which makes the thing a whole lot worse, of course. But from the official source, 648,269 positive cases and 11,871 deaths. Now, I'm sure I saw on the television that it was over 12,000, but like I said, that was the what I picked up from the official source. Whether the official source is a good source is a whole different kettle of fish. But even within Florida, almost 12,000, if not more, which is just, again, it's heartbreaking. And we have to realize this isn't just a number regarding some kind of product. This is human life. This is fellow brothers and sisters of all walks of life, rich and poor, black and white, male, female, young and old, each person representing a child of God. Just in case we forget that, and we can just trot out these numbers as if they're of no significance. It's just awful. And so to keep these kind of things grounded, here's a story. I hope I pronounce her name correctly. Gerda Garbatsky. She was 90, and she died on March the 16th, 2020. You think, 90? wow, good age. Yeah, she was going to die anyway. Well, say that about everyone. But should they be dying of something which really could have been reduced massively? And this is where the story comes in. She was a bookkeeper in Huntingdon, New York. Gerda Grabatsky had been through much in her life. As a child, she'd barely escaped Nazi-occupied Austria on the eve of World War II. Her father, grandmother, and other relatives were later killed by German forces. The home she fled to in Birmingham, England, was bombed. Yeah, I can imagine. Birmingham is kind of a modern city because a lot of it was bombed by German bombers. And after eventually settling in New York City, Gerda developed breast cancer and beat it. She was a survivor, her grandson Jeffrey Sorensen said, and then this happened. As Jeffrey sat in his home office on the night of Gerda's death, he was unable to grieve with his own family. He was sick and would test positive for COVID-19 a few days later. So he opened Twitter. There he posted a short obituary and a link to a 26-minute interview he'd conducted with his grandmother 8 years before. Jeffrey didn't have many followers and didn't expect much. But as he lay in bed trying to sleep, his phone lit up with hundreds of retweets and comments. They offered comfort for him and admiration for her. It blew my mind, he said. I think she would have found it amazing, Jeffrey said. She would have been honoured. And so that's what we do. We honour those who've died from this. We honour those who work in close contact with those who are ill and who risk contracting it themselves. We honour those who make our lives normal by doing things which put them at risk of people who think that they know better than science and it's all about them, which obviously I find really annoying. Can I tell you why I find it annoying? When I went for my first ever job interview, I was, I'd be 16. And I went to a job interview, which eventually became my first job as a trainee architectural technician. I had to do a test, which I managed to pass somehow, and then it was an interview. And so I had to buy a jacket. I'd never worn a proper jacket before. And so my stepmom and myself went to a store in a place called Stockport, I think. And I came out with this most gaudy 1970s thing. Lapels out here. You know, if I'd have flapped them hard enough, I could have flown off. The most horrible colour. Anyway, I went for the interview, and one of the questions was, what makes you annoyed? My immediate response was, stupid people. People who have no care for others. In my mind, I was thinking about all these people who prank others and put people at severe risk for injury and stuff. And they all think it's an absolute hoot, whereas a lot of people can be hurt doing those kind of things. Now, nothing's changed in that 42 years. Oh my goodness. But nothing's changed. Stupid people still annoy me. And the kind of stupid we get now are those who are just so self-focused that nothing else matters. Oh, yes, that is a button. Boom, boom, boom. Bill Ingalls, oh, please wear it to church. It went the way of all flesh. I probably set it on fire and danced on it. But even if I still had it, I don't think I could get my arm into it. I was very slim in those days. Thanks for making me remember that as well, Bill. Yes, oh, the days when I had a waistline that was less than my chest size. Anyway, yeah, it was awful. No, I don't think I've got any pictures of it. I think the camera would have broken. I mean, it just wouldn't be able to handle it. But you remember the 70s. Yeah, so it was bad. So that's where we are. And that's partly why I do this, because if everybody just behave rationally, if everyone just looked at the science and said, this is what we need to do, what a difference it would make. My goodness, it would. But, you know, I was watching a show about people who think that there are reptilian people and they are the hierarchy. And they have thousands of followers and have written lots of best-selling books about the reptilian people who are aliens from another planet who are actually shapeshifters, and they can fake being human. And the royal family are total reptilians. That's the British royal family. But so was Clinton and Bush Senior. And this stuff writes itself. And I would include those kinds of sort of stupid people. And people who say that they can be in contact with the dead. And those people who are desperate to believe them. Yeah, it's a weird world. Bill had a white disco suit. Its too is gone. Aren't you glad though? And mind you, if it was made of, what was the material? Terylene or something like that, it's probably still around, because that like gluten-free food would last nuclear explosions, and when the sun goes out, what's it called? Thingy death, cosmic death? No, whatever that called, whatever the scientific term is, but they'll still be around. Terylene suits and gluten-free food and Twinkies, they will all survive. Oh, and cockroaches, they'll still be around. So what questions have I been asked this week? It's been a nice, interesting sort of smorgasbord of questions to do with the Bible, to do with the Bible study we're doing, to do with the Sunday readings, then moving into politics and into church and church life and things like that. And some of them have been really, really good, and I'll probably get to one or two of those. But the one question which has been asked the most, and this was of this morning when I was reading a couple more questions, has been to do with, let me read what I wrote here. You've brought up several times during the recent Bible study and in your sermons the theme of what it is to be and about one's being. What does it mean to be? What is it to think about one's being? And how does one go about it? And why would we do it? And I think this is a really, really good question. And obviously, I thought that many people would have immediately have understood what I was talking about. But for those who haven't, let me try and explain. And for those of you who kind of get a bit mushy when things get personal, well, I'm going to have to get a bit personal. Now, I introduced this idea of what it is to be and think about who you are and what you are in session 1 of the Sermon on the Mount. And I did so because it's absolutely necessary to have an understanding of what exactly makes you tick, so as to be able to comprehend and to begin to live the wisdom flourishing into which Jesus invites us. The Sermon on the Mount is wisdom literature, basically, but it has a philosophical undertone, and it has to do with how do you live your life, or if you want to put it in modern parlance, and I'm going to use the title of a book, how you live your best life. And the Greek and Roman philosophers introduced loads of ways of looking at this with different schools of philosophy. And the end goal being that you increase your happiness in how you live. With Jesus, this is to do with our relationship with God, and if you read through to the end, it's to do with it's not to do as much with having eternal life, but living a life, a flourishing life that ends up being united with Christ, with a happy side effect kind of being, eternal life. And I put it that way because um, the, we don't do things so we get the reward of eternal life. We do things through love. We do things through relationship. But I'm already getting ahead of myself. All right. So, how do we do this to be or not to be thing about one's being? Now, as humans, we come to hold experiences, opinions, ways of seeing things, the ways of seeing the world, and a whole number of beliefs. Well, where do they come from? Some of these are positive, some are negative, some we like and then develop, and some seem to just appear out of nowhere reflexively when certain things happen. You know, we suddenly find ourselves thinking or believing, and you think, well, where did that come from? Now, you weren't born with these things, so where did they come from? At the same time, we're always, always, always a work in progress. And if you don't think you are a work in progress, that means you've stopped learning, and that means you've stopped growing. So, with that being the case, how do we get to grasp the things which move us, the things which make us us, unique individuals? When it comes to us being religious people, we make even more claims because we claim certain things have happened in terms of our faith. You know, for instance, Jesus was born of a virgin in a certain place, in a certain time. He did certain things. He lived and moved and went about among us. He died a horrible death, but that wasn't the end. Out of every person that's ever been alive, Jesus is the first to have been resurrected. But not only that, Jesus wasn't just an ordinary guy. He was, but he was also a God. Now just think about all these things. Where did they come from? How do we hold these beliefs? In what part of our lives do we hold them? Are they in the kind of intellectual bit that say, oh, these, they don't make much sense in terms of rationality and what we can see in this world, 21st century world, but I like the sound of them. What do we believe the Bible to be? And all these other things. So, and these beliefs should in some way influence how we behave. So that's the kind of why we should look at ourselves in a really, really, really deep way. Let's look at the how. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example because that's the only example I can really give. And I can do this because I have already been asked 1,000,001 times to do this. Before I was accepted for training and going to theological college, seminary over here, I was asked to do this several times along the way through the various meetings and committees and one-on-one interviews I had. Sometimes in huge depth, so sometimes just kind of specific snapshots of life. It was asked of me during my training. It was asked before I went from being a deacon to being priesthood. So the Church of England sees this as a very important part of one's formation. And so you have to go back to the beginning. And in my beginning, I was born. And what's my earliest memory? Well, it doesn't really matter about the earliest memory, but what I think it is a candle in a nursery, or at least it's in a room, and I think I may be in a crib. The trouble is, I probably invented that. I've probably thought into something that I've seen, and I've just applied it to myself, because memories can do that. We can invent our own memories. But it's to my mind, it's one of quiet and security. That is my first initial memory. The second thing is something I was told that for the best part of 6 months of my life, I just cried all the time. And it turned out that's because the coal fire we had, it was backing up. So the smoke and stuff wasn't getting out of the chimney, but some of it was coming into the room. And I was like a canary. But instead of dropping dead in a cage, I used to scream my head off. And that was the first 6 months of my life. Apparently, I don't know whether this was said with irony or it was actually true. My first word was why. So it wasn't mommy, daddy, or mum and dad, or variations. It was why. And apparently, I was really good at pointing at things and saying why. At least I wasn't pointing at myself and doing it kind of an existential thing. Why? What is the meaning of everything? That would have been a bit deep for a however old kid, baby. But that why has kind of stuck with me. I always want to know the why of things, how things work. Why are we doing this? I've always asked the questions. I've always been the awkward one. I said, why are we doing it this way? Why do we really want to do this? What's the motivation behind this? And it's gotten me in trouble quite a lot, in many different ways. School, work, there you go. Family background. This is a huge, huge thing. Again, we are not born in a vacuum. For me, I had an older sister. She was 10 years older than me. I was told that I was the result of a power outage. So, yay me, I was so wanted. But it's a part again. I was born to a woman, my mom, who was sick from the day I was born. And apparently it was me that caused her to be ill all the time. I didn't know it at the time. My dad had a hair lip and cleft palate, and he had a moustache all the time. I noticed there was something different about him, but it was never spoken of. But this did have the advantage of just allowing me to accept people as they appeared, without me thinking, ooh, and being put off by physical disabilities, mental disabilities. I'd say my mom was ill all the time, which meant that I did a lot of the housework, and I resented it. I was a kid. I mean, I was young, and I really wanted to be out playing and have my dinner when I got home, go out and play. Whereas I had to do the housework, I had to do the whole shopping. And when you're with a mother who all she seems to do through the eyes of a boy is watch TV and tell you to do stuff, you can resent that. My dad, he was a motor mechanic, but he could turn his hand to anything, and he always did everything to a high standard. So he'd build things. He would repair the old-fashioned vacuum tube televisions and radios and stuff. He would decorate. He would woodwork. He would metalwork. He'd repair cars, and I always seemed to tag along. And I wish I knew how, but it just seems that by osmosis, I learned how to do all these things. That, I would be looking at something that he was doing, and the next I'd be doing it. And he'd be teaching me the right way to use tools, how to be safe in doing these things. Like I knew about capacitors before I could even say the word, how to drain them and why. He used to get small capacitors and just ask me to put my finger across just to feel the small shock of a charged capacitor. He told me about transformers, step-down transformers, and if you reversed them, you had a step-up transformer. All these other things that I wish I knew how he taught me, because it would have been great for me to sort of, by osmosis, teach other people. And yet at the same time, he was a man who could turn in temper. He would turn up at home and just smash the place up. He was abusive physically and verbally to my mom. When she was really ill, she'd stay in bed, and he would just sort of rage at her and rage at me. And I have this single image of my sister, my 10-year-old sister, 10 years older than me sister, putting her arms around me in the living room while he just trashed the place. And we just stood there. And he used this word, lazyitis, about my mother, that she was just lazy. You don't want to be a person who gets lazyitis, as if it was some kind of disease you could catch. And to be honest, yeah, you can call me many things, but lazy is not one of them. And all these other things that happen. Social background, working class. We were all in the same boat. We're all pretty poor. But there was something that happened to me, which actually made me realize something. Because how you live is your normal. How you're brought up is your normal. I didn't know that other people lived in different ways. And my sister one year took me to this church. It was a Methodist church. And I went in, and it was, there was cake, there was food and stuff, and there were games and stuff. And I didn't know why I was there because nobody told me. And so I asked, why am I here? He said, well, this is a Christmas party for poor people. And the church was really, really good at letting you know we were doing this for you for a favor. Otherwise, you probably won't have a Christmas because you are poor. And that, boy, did that have an effect on me in terms of how not to approach people with your charity. Let me tell you how good I'm being to you here. That just, gives me the creeps. And the other fact is I didn't know we were poor. Because I knew people worse than me, and they were at the party, and it was just really, really weird. So that's one of the reasons I don't like parties. Also, in the school life, once my mom died when I was 8, and kids always pick on your weaknesses, and I had a number of them. I was a redhead. You can't imagine now. It's weird. I can't get out of the way of the camera because when I turn one way, the image moves the other. Anyway, I used to be really, really redhead, and people would pick on me for that. I had millions of freckles. I'm left-handed. People would pick on me for that. And then when my mom died, people would pick on me for that. I'm a bit pugilistic. You get to a certain point. I used to be. Then, I would fight. And it was it was the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're a redhead, you have a quick temper. I lived the self-fulfilling prophecy. Friends, my initial friends were from my neighborhood. We were always in trouble. We were always getting in trouble. Later on, when I moved schools, I developed a whole different group of friends, and they saved me because I think quite a lot of the friends I had ended up in prison. Most of them ended up being really bad boozers and multiple divorces and this, then. They're just not people you'd want to be around. But the weird thing, again, my dad, music became a way for me to escape. Music and reading, things that my dad instilled in me. And I have a weird schizophrenia about my dad. I love him for all these things, and I hate him for all these things. And they're both a part of who I am. Faith. First good few years of my life, faith was nowhere. And it wasn't until I actually started going to church that I actually met people for the first time who actually believed in something beyond what we could see. But then it was like, what kind of God? I was really confused because God in this church seemed to be equal angry and equal loving and merciful. And it was like God was my dad. You couldn't work him out. One time was, you're all going to burn in hell, this, then, and the other. Sinners, repent. And then next thing, God is love. And it was really freaky. And it was really, really confusing. And for the first few years of my it wasn't a Christian life, my church life, people talking about God, the Father, they were talking about Jesus. But there was like, Jesus is God. And it was the one question I didn't want to ask was, how is Jesus and God and God the Father? The whole Trinitarian thing. I just didn't want to get anywhere near it. But then I met the people, and these people were just so different. And when I'm talking to people, I'm talking mostly elderly. This was a church that had gone to the verge of dying. And they got a new vicar who was probably in his 50s, and he just revived the whole thing. His wife was a better preacher than he was. Um, and her Sunday school lessons were superb. They were absolutely superb. And most of the theology I learned, atonement, righteousness, things like that, I learned from her, or we learned from her. And only when I went to do study theology, I could use posh words, but I still use the words that she taught me because they're probably better than the posh words, and they're just as meaningful. But there is other people, and I was adopted by this elderly couple who were in their 80s, and that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. This gauche kid who was so full of anger and confusion and all sorts, and yet a couple out of this church, Morris and Sally Bickerdike of blessed memory, saw something in me that they thought was worth their time and energy to grow. I don't know what the term is really. And what about the Bible? What is the Bible? Well, for many people, it's like an operator's manual. On the bottom shelf, you can't see it there. Well, you see the keyboard, and then there's the neck of a guitar. The bottom shelf there is full of manuals. Some of them are still wrapped in their plastic because, hey, I'm a guy. We don't use manuals. And these are for just about everything under the sun, from televisions to computers to cameras, software, all kinds of things. And as long as I can get it to work to do what I want it to do, then I'm not going to crack open a manual. Well, it's kind of weird, really, because just for some reason, I many years after having my Pentax camera, and I tend to set it to autofocus, center focus, and then I will change the depth of field as I want it, and so it's kind of semi-automatic. Well, I read the manual once, and I thought, oh, it can do all these different things that I never knew. And so I looked at a couple more manuals of other things, and I thought, wow, I didn't know I could do that. I only ever make use of it for what I want. And unfortunately, a lot of people use the Bible like that. They use it as an operator's manual rather than a love story. And what they do is they have an idea about who they are and how they see life because of all their experiences, a bit similar to what I've been explaining. And then they find in the Bible the bits that kind of correspond to that, and then they kind of justify what their faith is and how they live their lives through those operator's manual versions of the Bible usage, if that makes sense. Which is not a good way, because and you know, you've heard it said, Bible, Bible, basic instructions before leaving Earth. That's horrific. Do you have any friends that you treat like that? Who is this person? What can I use them for? Oh yeah, they know this. I will put that in my data bank, and then when I need whatever that is, they're a lawyer, I'll use them as a lawyer. They're a doctor, I'll use them as a doctor. They repair things, I'll use them for repairing things. And that's it. That's the whole level of relationship we have with them. Why do we use God like that quite often? It isn't an operator's manual. It's a love story, and we have to read it. Which brings to the notion that of Bible knowledge, because it's the best-selling book and one of the least read. Knowing too little about the Bible is to have an uninformed faith. And it's not people like me as preachers and clergy and doing Bible studies that are going to improve your relationship with God. It's you doing the work. At the other end of it is knowing too much of the Bible, but all you know about the Bible is in a vacuum. It's not in context. You know the Bible, you know about the Bible and in the Bible, but you cannot place the Bible in its history. You cannot place the Bible in its Christian history. So you're really good at sticking together and creating notions of what the Bible says to create the reality you want it to have rather than it speak to you. So that's another dangerous thing. Knowing too little is dangerous. Knowing too much about the Bible but having it in a vacuum is equally dangerous. Then there are your politics. Where do your politics come from? What are your politics? Have you really drilled deep down to see where they come from? Now, if you're a Christian, the Bible should inform your politics and not the other way around. And at the same time, we must understand that our own experience, our own upbringing, our own life lessons are something we kind of, as I've said, see as the norm. And we can often universalize our own experiences as if everybody else's life is the same as ours. And that's a dangerous thing to do. One of my first pastoral experiences was a shock to me because of that. When I was a deacon in my first parish, I was, all my clerical shirts were still fresh out of the bag and nicely pressed and black as black can be. And I was asked to do a funeral, my first ever funeral. Wow, what a nerve-wracking thing that is. It was somebody's mother had died. And so I was to visit the son. Knocked on the door and somebody answered the door, and my immediate thought is, well, this must be the grandfather or something. Well, no, it was the son. But he was in his mid to late 60s. See, because my mom died when I was 8, in my mind, the norm was that most other people's mom died when they were young. So to meet somebody who was grieving his mother, and they were in their 60s, and the mother was in the late 80s, it was a shock because I universalized my own experience and made the wild assumption that everybody else would have that view. And we can do this in our politics, that our history of being able to go to college or not, being able to get one job after another with very little time out of work or not, informs how we view the unemployed, the poor, the rich, all sorts of stuff. And then we need to bring the Bible into this, because I really don't understand when people think they can use the Bible to justify there being poor people. And we live in a society that glorifies wealth and fame and celebrity, none of which are Bible themes, and yet we join in just the same. It really is weird. And part of that is because that's what society does. And too many Christians don't think about how we imbibe society, how we've been encultured is the proper word. The culture around us informs a lot of what we do. Ethics. There is such a thing as Christian ethics. And it doesn't involve violence or lying or cheating or bullying. It doesn't involve having a herd mentality, because believe it or not, there are different ways of seeing the same issue within the Christian faith. We've got 2,000 years of this. And yet we're getting like the rest of society, where we're turning into sound bites and becoming embittered and outraged when somebody else has a different point of view. The other thing is that, as I've just mentioned, we can tend to believe a lot of things that we see as ethical or unethical, and accept them as being of God, whereas they're not. They're just societal. We live in a society which is a lot different than my grandfather's. And a lot of things that he accepted as normal wouldn't pass muster at all now. Is your cup half full or half empty? How do you view your life? When you immediately respond, your initial response, the one way you've not had time to think about it, what is it? Is it always in terms of the negative? Is it always in terms of jealousy or resentment or anger or pity or acceptance or love or gratitude? What is it that first feels? What is your first feel rather than the first rational idea? Because that will tell you a lot about you. It used to be that I was a half empty, uber cynical. Um, and please don't start writing messages. Yes, I am still cynical. Um, uh, but I'm trying to change that. I am not the same person I was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15, or whatever. And because this is a work in progress, we are all works in progress. And part of that is being given the gift of recognizing grace and blessings. Some people, they'll just plod on through a life of horror and think this is God's gift to them. So when you ask them, how are you? And they say, oh, I'm blessed. It's a reflexive thing they say. It's a bit like when somebody asks you, how are you? Say, I'm good. How are you? You know, it's almost a polite conversation stopper. But a lot of these people aren't reflecting. They're not doing this thing. Why are they where they are? How are they supposed to be here? A lot of people just make the assumption, which is kind of very Victorian, from it's that verse I've used before from All Things Bright and Beautiful. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. Hey, I am where I am because God has made this thing. Not necessarily true. There's always the option of trying to change. But if we are these half-empty people, and believe me, there's too many Christians who are, the glasses are half empty. Why would you want to be around them? There's some absolutely negative people, and they claim the name of Christian, and they have a lot going on. If only they would see this grace that's being given to them. Now, again, it took me, I don't know how long, to begin to travel down this different road of glass half full rather than half empty. It took me, I don't know, forever to realize that my adopted grandparents were one of the best things that ever happened to me. And then when I actually got to live with my maternal grandfather, that opened up a whole another road to allow me to begin to grow in so many different ways. One of them to be able to grow up as well. But I will be forever thankful for Maurice and Sally, and I wish I could say I thank them for how they invested in me, but I'm pretty sure I didn't, because I was a gauche kid and I used to ask dumb questions rather than take advantage of what they had to offer. My friends, I don't think I've got one friend that I cannot rely on. I'm really, really fortunate. I always have, from the get-go of becoming a Christian, when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I have always sought what is true. And sometimes that comes at a cost. Sometimes the truth is pretty self-evident. Sometimes it isn't. But within my working life, where a lot of companies want you to cut corners, or to when I worked in a shop as a sales manager, to get the sale, and it didn't matter if you lied. Well, it did matter to me, and to try and treat people equally, and to try and find what's true. It puts you in some really odd situations, doing the honest thing, like in my first parish, of phoning the police because of the local drug dealer and then being shot at. It was a side effect of telling the truth. Um, Telling the truth about my experiences in my former parish didn't make me very popular, not within the diocese. Um, it's and other things that happen in work, at school. Although I was a bit stupid sometimes, and I still am. I'm a work in progress. I'm not perfect in any way, shape, or form. So all these things and more inform who we are in both positive and negative ways. But we have to spend the time doing self-reflection. We have to dig in deep into who we are, um, so that we know who God's dealing with. Because he's not dealing with the pastiche, the plastic image, the papier-mâché, the mask of who we are. He is dealing with the inner heart of who we are. But if we don't know who we are, how do we know what we're supposed to become? How do we know how we're supposed to change to become like Jesus? How do we know that this is affecting us in so many different ways if we don't do the self-reflection? How do we know that we do this because of X or Y, and it's now become such a reflexive part of who we are that we don't even think about it. We just do. That comes out, and yet we need to change it. So I want to introduce you to a notion which I'm hoping you've heard of before. And I'm hoping that some of you may have done, but I would encourage you to do this. And it's a spiritual autobiography. Again, I had to do multiple number of these, and I've always found them to be hard and emotional, which for a Brit is something you try and avoid, but worth the work. Because at the end of it all, you see where God is working in your life, and you're like awestruck in terms of those God incidences that I always talk about. Now, when I was the warden of vocations, which was a title bestowed upon me by the bishop here, and that was people who were seeking the possibility of ordination through the diaconate or the priesthood. Local people, they would come and we'd meet once a month, and we just kind of chew the fat as to what it means, what is a priest, what do they do, what's a deacon. The one thing I couldn't do in the diocese was to say this is the process, because it seemed to be as individual as every person, so I could only just be there for them. But one of the things I did is that I asked them to write a spiritual autobiography, and I asked them, I didn't want it, I was born, I've been going to church since I can remember, I was confirmed by such and such a bishop, I read the Bible now and again, I think Jesus is quite nice. I want something that is really, really deep and hard work. And some of them, and it's really amazing, some of them rose the challenge, and I would ask them if they were able to read it out to the group. And some of them were just amazing, really amazing. And you would be both in tears and thanking God at the same time for the marvelous stories that they could bring of faith and redemption. Some of them were, whoa, dear, this is not very deep. You've not really thought about anything. And some of them were about other people. It was just amazing, my spiritual autobiography is going to be all about my mom and what I think about her. And it's not what I asked. So it's not an easy thing to do. But it's really, really important to be informed about who you are. So I would ask you to try do that. Write a spiritual autobiography. Put in it your earliest memories, the things that form you, the horrors, the good things. I had a wonderful time as a child. I mean, I've kind of painted it with a kind of English grey fog, but I had so much freedom. I was a latchkey kid from the age of 8. I could go in and out. We lived on the verge of the countryside, so there was always a bunch of us playing soccer and going onto the fields and running riot, doing silly things, playing games, and it was just it was very a joyful thing. It was really, you know, it was best to be out than to be at home. And that was even more the case when my dad remarried, but that's a completely other story. But there's all the joys and all the things. And where are you now compared to where you were? I mean, it's a Lenten experience. The whole thing about Lent is to, as part of the discipline of Lent, is to say, is my prayer life better than it was last year? In what way has God and I come closer? You know, what does Jesus mean to me? What does my faith mean to me? What's my church experience? What does that mean? All these things and more go into these things. And when you write your next one, it'll still include a lot of those things, but how you see those things may have changed. When my dad died, I put him on a pedestal. The only thing I could think about was all this good stuff he'd given me. And the result of that is I didn't grieve. For a good few years, my dad was his plaster saint, Saint Mechanic, Saint George, that was his name. The one who gave me these gifts of reading, because he sat me on the end of the table every night and made me read, who loved science and technology and stuff, and made me love science and technology, who gave me this ability to work with my hands and to, you know, if this can be fixed, I'll fix it. But if, you know, if I break it, I'll make it so that nobody else can fix it. It's kind of a motto. But it was only half of who he was. And it wasn't until I brought the dark side in that I started to grieve and started to try and sort of think about my dad as a full human being. So that's part of it as well. But it takes time, and we really need, it really is a worthwhile effort to do that. And I would commend it to you. Now, I've managed to do 57 minutes with hardly a moment to drink. Gosh, I can go on. But I really do hope that this idea of being, or what it is to be, how to look at yourself and all the formative things which make you in both good and bad ways, and the things that you may need to work on, how you may need to fall in love with the Bible so you can fall in love with the writer of the Bible, because he already loves you. And if you don't feel that, if God is still that mysterious, wrathful figure, then you're doing yourself a disservice, not only in your faith, but, you know, if, as I said on Sunday, if you don't love yourself and you don't know that God already loves you, then that's going to affect how you approach everything else outside, in all relationships. Again, we are works in progress. We are not complete. We are not whole. We've not arrived. And again, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus is taking us on this journey towards healing and wholeness, and he offers himself as the template for that flourishing. Of course, as he warns us, it'll be a journey where people may mock us, it may create enemies for us. It may mean that we have to change how we do things and who we do them with. It may mean that we drop out of some societal norms because they're against the rule of love into which Jesus encourages us to live. It may mean that we do criticize things that society takes as normal, but within the realm of the Christian faith are far from it. And it may mean that our politics gets skewed in a different way, because we just don't accept wholesale what we're being sold, and we shouldn't do. Well, thank you, Kit, for your remark, and I have to say, I hope you've got something out of it. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to finish this cup of coffee, cold cup of coffee, and what's going to happen? The next thing will be Thursday, so that will be afternoon tea with Father Lewis and me at 3 o'clock Thursday the 10th. So I hope to see you all then. If not, I hope to see some of the 8 o'clockers at the 8 o'clock service, but only with those provisos. I'll make sure that Margot and Jay send them out, so you have it in writing what's necessary. And things as per normal for the 10 o'clock service. And maybe I'll see a few of you at the drive-through communion afterwards. So until then, keep me in your prayers as you are in mine. Please remember the country with all the first responders and the people who are ill, those who provide us with goods which puts them at risk, and those who mourn. And goodbye and God bless.